Thank you very much, Madam Chairwoman. It is a pleasure and an honor for me to be with you this afternoon and to offer some thoughts on the U.S. role in the Middle East after the presidential election. But first, I think I must step back and speak for a moment about the quite remarkable role that the Middle East played in the election. For in an election that was understandably and traditionally focused on domestic concerns, on the slowly recovering economy, on the too gradually falling unemployment rate, on larger questions of tax policy and tax fairness and the relationship between government and the individual, the attention was diverted to foreign affairs was almost entirely devoted to the Middle East. True, Governor Romney, President Obama's challenger, referred twice to the crisis in Mali in one presidential debate. And true, the president's campaign over the summer tried to define Romney in a barrage of television ads as a cold-hearted corporate raider who had outsourced American jobs to China, a favor that was returned by Romney in the final days of the campaign. And true, there were occasional warnings from the governor that our failure to get America's fiscal house in order would lead us down the ruinous path blazed by Greece, and suggestions that Russia is America's #1 geopolitical foe. But day in and day out, through the spring, summer, and fall, and crystallized in that final presidential debate 2 weeks before the election, it was America's role in the Middle East that was the central foreign policy focus of both campaigns. Whether America has defended and will defend its ally Israel, and whether it has respected and supported and will respect and support its right to self-defense, where America read and responded appropriately to the Arab upheavals over the last 22 months, and whether our approach to new Islamist governing forces is balanced and prudent or irresolute and naive. Specifically, the tragic killing of Ambassador Stevens and 3 aides in Benghazi, Libya, reflected a failure to recognize, even a refusal to recognize, the dangers inherent in the Arab political transitions, including extremist links to terror, or whether it was an unforeseeable act of post-revolutionary violence and should not be a pretext for disengagement or for a heavier-handed diplomatic security regime. Whether America has abandoned its leadership and forsaken our allies in confronting oppressive and extremist forces in North Africa and the Middle East, specifically by taking what was characterized as a back seat in the multinational military campaign against the Gaddafi regime in Libya, and by today allowing the atrocities in Syria to continue. Or a new emphasis on multilateralism, the adoption of a longer time horizon in assessing conflicts and gaming out post-conflict scenarios, and a hesitancy to initiate a third war in the Middle East in a decade have been hallmarks of wiser and no less robust American leadership. Finally, whether the president has been weak on Iran, resistant to congressional efforts to tighten sanctions as the centrifuges continue to spin, and failing to demonstrate to the mullahs American resolve to put a stop to their pursuit of nuclear weapons capability, or whether the president has played it smart, gaining international consensus on the urgency of the Iranian threat, political legitimacy for unprecedented international sanctions, and say clear, though less bellicose, signal of American determination to deny Tehran's nuclear ambitions. These were the main foreign policy charges and responses heard in the closing weeks of the campaign. Echoed in the line of the Republican convention acceptance speech by Governor Romney that America would never again, quote, throw allies like Libya under the bus, and in his references in the final debate and elsewhere to what he called the president's apology tour of the Middle East, and in the repeated pledges by the president to, quote, always have Israel's back, his repeated commitment to support minority rights and women's rights in the new political order in post-revolutionary Arab states, and in his insistence that he would not tolerate a nuclear-armed Iran. For this heavy concentration of foreign policy attention on the Middle East are clear, and I will reduce them to 4 points. A bipartisan consensus that a nuclear Iran would lead to the dissolution of the Non-Proliferation Treaty and threaten a broad range of U.S. interests and global peace. Second, recognition that while American dependence on Middle East oil is declining and expected at current rates to be virtually eliminated in 2 decades, The region's energy resources are now and will continue for many years to be pivotal to global economic vitality. Third, American interest, again, bipartisan, in defending universal human rights standards and encouraging the embrace of democratic systems and norms. And American public support that crosses ethnic and religious and regional lines for a secure Israel, recognized by and at peace with its neighbors, and integrated fully in the community of nations. These were the principal Middle East issues and lines of argument in this campaign, and the principal reasons I would submit for their prominence. Now, while with the President's re-election last week, questions naturally will be raised in the region, internationally, and in my own country about the future course of U.S. Middle East policy. I know that critics of the Israeli government have been saying privately and often publicly for months, and I have heard this with my colleagues in many meetings that AJC has been privileged to have with policymakers from around the world, that they are hoping for a sterner approach by President Obama toward Jerusalem, belief that such toughness will yield progress toward a two-state solution. Some in Israel and in the multi-faith community of American Friends of Israel have expressed fears that a second-term president whose instincts and fidelity they question could grant those critics' wishes. Similar fears have been expressed about Iran policy and whether the president's repeated rejection this year of containment as an option to confronting the nuclear threat might be re-examined after the voters have had their say. Evidence that either scenario is the likely course for the second Obama term. Relations between Washington and Jerusalem did not advance the cause of Middle East peace or other U.S. strategic interests in 2009, when the president insisted on an Israeli settlement freeze, and in 2010, when a provocatively timed Israeli settlement announcement caused further friction with the White House. Could a new disconnect between traditional friends and partners be expected to help America and its other allies cope with a rapidly changing and still volatile region in 2013 and beyond? We can expect a second Obama administration to maintain its commitment to a negotiated two-state solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and to advance that objective through a combination of security reassurances to both parties, a decision to take policy disagreements between allies out of the public arena, of increased economic, political, and civil society interaction to build and rebuild trust that will make eventual compromise sustainable, and full court effort to discourage the Palestinians' bid to bypass negotiations and seek to enhance their status in the United Nations, an effort that will continue to play out even after an expected General Assembly vote on this question in the coming weeks. AJC urges all governments that yearn for an end to this conflict to oppose that UN effort by President Abbas. It will not advance peace or Palestinian statehood. In fact, it will set us farther back. What we not expect from the administration is public arm twisting. First, because it is ineffective and of dubious merit in dealing with a democratic ally. And second, and more significantly, because it is Washington's perception that Palestinian leadership is not now willing or able to negotiate and implement a mutually acceptable compromise. It is unrealistic to expect a solution in the near term. I add that I do not expect such administration action nor concentrated administration focus on this conflict as the highest Middle East priority, because widespread perception on both ends of Pennsylvania Avenue in both parties that the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, while a continuing American concern requiring a continuing American attention, is by no means the most urgent Middle East problem that the United States and the international community now confront. The priority is and must be the source of greatest danger, the prospect of a nuclear-armed Iran. I'm confident that we can expect continued American partnership with the European Union in confronting this menace. The P5+1 negotiators will be meeting in the coming days to consult on next steps. I see no indication that Washington, London, Paris, or Berlin, or Brussels intends to retreat from the firm lines laid out in this year's unsatisfactory talks with the Iranian regime, nor any inclination to lessen the pressure on Tehran. Indeed, the tough new measures the EU has adopted in recent weeks, on top of the dramatic financial sanctions and oil embargo enacted earlier this year, have been celebrated in Washington. In the coming weeks, I expect further initiatives to be taken in Congress, with administration support to build on those bold European steps. Second, I expect the second Obama administration to find new ways to reinforce its message that containment of a nuclear Iran is not an acceptable option. This isn't a Cold War, where hotlines and redundant fire control systems and extensive diplomatic interaction and the concept of mutually assured destruction allowed two nuclear superpowers to face each other, veering only occasionally into crisis for half a century and even to this day. The United States and its allies cannot count on containing a nuclear Iran, a country that routinely dispatches terrorists to foreign shores, as we saw clearly and horrifically in Bulgaria and elsewhere in recent months, a country that sponsors and arms terrorist that arms terrorist organizations, a country whose possession of nuclear weaponry will be a fatal blow to the Non-Proliferation Treaty and set off a nuclear arms race in the world's most volatile region. Reiterating the non-containment message through very visible preparation to take forceful steps, should diplomacy continue to disappoint, will help drive the point home to Tehran, if anything can. It would be helpful as well and consistent with the decisive measures they have already taken if America's European allies would also raise their voices on this issue, asserting publicly that they stand with Washington in refusing to accept and do not plan simply to contain a nuclear-armed Iran. Briefly touch on four other expectations I have of second-term administration policies on the Middle East. On the Arab upheaval, I do expect continued engagement with Islamist forces dominating or playing a substantial role in post-revolutionary Arab states. A continued expectation that pragmatism and a political survival instinct will bend these forces toward moderation and toward the West. I'm not hopeful that this high-stakes experiment will succeed, although I recognize that the choices the administration faces are not palatable. I'm particularly concerned, and I expect this delegation to be concerned, about the long-term social impact of these movements' success in countries that have long interacted with and been relied on by the West, and the possible impact on immigration and on the attitudes of immigrant communities in Europe. Naturally, I am also concerned about the impact on Israel's security and on the status of women in these societies and on the protection of Christian and other minority communities. On Syria, I do expect America's resistance to military assistance, the possibility of some form of military intervention on behalf of the opposition. I do expect that resistance to decline, although given the current realities, I do not expect troops on the ground. The instability generated by the current crisis, the impact on Jordan and Turkey and Lebanon and now on Israel, and the humanitarian costs are simply too great. On another issue of signal importance to the fight against global terrorism, I expect further efforts by the administration to isolate and attack Hezbollah, the Iran-sponsored and subsidized terrorist organization. I know Washington has urged the European Union to join the United States and other nations in designating Hezbollah as a terrorist organization, a step that AJC has actively advocated. I am hopeful that progress will be made on this critical front in the coming weeks and months. And this may be more of a hope than an expectation. I do believe that we will see in the second Obama term an effort to cool tensions in the Eastern Mediterranean between Turkey and Israel, tensions that do not serve the strategic interests of either state and that present an unnecessary complication in the development of vast undersea energy resources that could be of benefit not only to Israel, Cyprus, and Greece, but the entire region. Challenges and opportunities my AJC colleagues and I foresee in the Middle East in the second Obama administration. As always, Washington's partnership with the European Union in confronting common threats and seizing opportunities for progress and peace will be of paramount importance. And specifically, the AJC Transatlantic Institute, based in Brussels, will continue to work toward the closest possible cooperation on these and other issues among our sister democracies.
Thank you, Jason Isaacson, and welcome to all the colleagues who just arrived during this. And we take Daniel Schwammenthal's speech in the row. That's yours.
Thank you very much. I would like to just add a few words on the European angle, because we believe that a strong transatlantic relationship and strong transatlantic cooperation in the Middle East is a prerequisite for advancing our shared goals of advancing human rights, pluralism, and democracy and peace in the region. We take the example of Iran. Unfortunately, for too long over the past 10 years, there has been a division between the United States and Europe. And as a result of that division of what is the best path ahead, we have lost critical time. Unfortunately, over the last couple of years, and particularly this year, the policy views in Washington and in Europe have come together, and we have seen tremendous progress on this front. The European Union has imposed some of the toughest sanctions, and it has had a tremendous impact in Iran. It has led to the resumption of talks between the P5+1, and at least the hope that perhaps this conflict over Iran's nuclear weapons program can be resolved peacefully. This is a result of, strong transatlantic relationship. On the other hand, we see still on many issues division not only between the United States and Europe, but even within Europe, and that weakens our position. And one of the issues that is on top of our agenda, and also of great concern to the US administration, is Europe's refusal to this day to put Hezbollah on its terror list. The arguments put forward by the European Union are hard to comprehend and often conflicting. On the one hand, it is argued that there is supposedly not enough evidence for such a listing. This is difficult to comprehend given Hezbollah's well-documented history of crimes and terrorism from back in the early days in the 1980s, when Hezbollah suicide bombers killed nearly 300 French and American peacekeepers in Beirut, to the attacks on a Jewish community center in Argentina in the 1990s, to the string of attempts and unfortunately also successful attack in Bulgaria, EU territory, killing 5 Israeli tourists and a Bulgarian bus driver, an EU citizen. The argument usually put forward is that supposedly Hezbollah has to be understood not only as a military organization, as the EU puts it, but also that it also has a political role to play, that there is a sort of clear division between these two arms. Now, even Hezbollah itself disagrees with the EU on this important point. Various Hezbollah members, senior Hezbollah members, have repeatedly reassured the world that there is no such division, that the political leadership is the exact same leadership that also gives the orders to the military, the terrorist wing. If we look at a little bit closer at the political activity, the so-called political activity of Hezbollah in Lebanon, we clearly and immediately realize that this role has nothing to do with the sort of politics we are used to in the United States or here in Europe. Even when Hezbollah is involved in politics, it is involving itself as an organization in politics. It is intimidating, kidnapping, assassinating its political opponents. This is clearly not something that we believe the European Union should continue validating with its refusal to list Hezbollah as a terrorist organization. Let's just remember the 2005 assassination of former Prime Minister Hariri. We have a special UN tribunal looking into this assassination, and it has indicted several Hezbollah members for this crime. Or look at the 2008 takeover of Western Beirut by Hezbollah, which caused the deaths of nearly 100 people, many of them civilians. And this takeover of Western Beirut was the way Hezbollah made itself part of the current government. It is important to note that several other Western nations have found enough evidence and enough reason to list Hezbollah, not just the United States, but also countries in the European Union, the Netherlands and the United Kingdom, and other governments such as in Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. And New Zealand specifically, when it listed Hezbollah, mentioned the takeover of Western Beirut as an act of terrorism, not as an act of politics. So we hope that the European Union will change its course here as well and find common ground with the United States, because it is of the utmost importance that we put an end to Hezbollah's ability to recruit, organize, and collect money in Europe as we speak. 950 members in Germany alone, identified by the German intelligence services. and continue to recruit, collect money, and organize in Europe for its terrorist activities. An important issue will come to a head later this month. The Palestinian Authority has applied for observer status in the United Nations. President Obama has just had a call with President Abbas, urging him to rethink this move. Unfortunately, he was rebuffed. We know that given the political realities in the United Nations General Assembly, there will be an automatic majority for this move. So, in a way, the way the European Union will vote or not will not change the eventual outcome. But the Palestinians are, of course, also looking for sort of credibility that it can only gain through support from Western nations. But let's imagine for a moment, if not only President Obama had called Abbas, but every single head of state and government from the European Union, Lady Ashton had called, I think it would have made a tremendous difference in the calculation of the Palestinians whether this would be a good move. And again, let me underline that the reason we oppose this is not that because we oppose a Palestinian state. To the contrary, we believe in a two-state solution, the creation of a democratic Palestinian state living side by side in peace and security with Israel. But we believe that such a move will have the exact opposite effect. It will make finding peace more difficult, more complicated, and will be a throwback. So I'll stop here and looking forward to your questions and comments.
Thank you, Daniel Schwammenthal. So please, colleagues, now we have a possibility to ask, comment.
Thank you very much. Maybe my question would be a little bit more input made. Do you hear? Okay. Question is regarding elections and the votes by Jewish community, because in the media are now quite many comments that the Israeli government and Prime Minister, of course, acted more, or at least it would be easier maybe to work with President Romney if it would be the case. But the research, the survey is giving us data that 70% of Jewish community in the United States voted for Obama. So how you could comment on that? Is it kind of, I don't know, conflict maybe within itself, and or it's only escalating in the media, and we shouldn't give any attention to? Thank you.
Thank you. And if we, so Alf Svensson's question here.
Thank you very much for your speeches and the good information you gave us. Perhaps my question is a bit aside, but you mentioned, Mr. Isaacson, Turkey. And we know, all of us, that Turkey is a strong country, or becoming stronger and stronger. Could you present to us some information? How do you analyze or think about the relations for the future between Israel and Turkey?
And if we still take Ivo Weigel's question here, so we have three in a row, and then your answers.
Thank you, Chair. I would like, well, it was, thank you, very interesting, both actions and also, so I had the feeling that you avoided the problems, that you more try to have a non-problematic debate today, because there are some questions where I will try to bring some dynamics in our debate. I was expecting that you would comment the political alliance in Israel between Netanyahu and Lieberman's party, and how may it influence the readiness to Israel to negotiate in good faith with the Palestine and Authority, and what will be the perception, the further perception in the Arab world of this situation in Israel? It probably it is a reason for concern and very lively debates in Israel itself. I was there 2 weeks ago and had a lot of meetings with intellectuals, and they have their concerns. So I would like to hear what are your comments and what are your concerns to it. Secondly, I am encouraged, and I share also the opinion. Of course, my thinking is wishful thinking, and you have probably more information about it, but that Obama will pursue the idea of two-state solution. Now, if we agree upon it, then how we can bring into the harmony what's going on in Israel, with the settlements growing and tensions between the settlers and the Palestinian population. So I think we are not credible partners in any debate if we don't tackle this problem also from this side. Under, of course, assumption that we are sitting here in the group of friendship with Israel. So we ask this because we believe that two-state solution is a warranty for Israel being accepted, recognized, living safely, and have an intolerant future. I would like to ask you, we expect from American administration in the second Abbas term on the democratization in the Gulf countries. It's so obvious now that we have of democratization, even though we can have our doubts about it from state to state, but nevertheless, the movement is towards a kind of democratization. So far, we didn't see any kind of serious attempts to democratize in the countries, in the Gulf countries. If we meet as friends, we agree about the principles of democracy. These countries, not to speak about human rights, rights of women, and etc. So these are some questions which I have to. Thank you.
Thank you. Maybe if Jason, you would like to start, and then Daniel.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairwoman. Well, this is a full plate, so let me begin with your question. Question about the Jewish vote. Actually, was not that surprising, and it's not only as a representative of AJC, which polls American Jews regularly and knows pretty well how they feel about political issues and about a range of issues. And we find over the years that this kind of split is very much in the tradition of where American Jews fall out on the political spectrum. Jews have traditionally supported the Democratic candidate for president and nearly every office. Not every office, but nearly every office. Often in this kind of a ratio. You don't fill out on your voter card what you're religious, naturally. But there are exit polls, and we poll people randomly, and we're able to select a pretty good sample. What you have to understand is that there are many issues in the minds of Jewish voters, like every American voter, when they walk into the polling place. Economy, world, healthcare, you name it, reproductive rights, a range of issues. We had a lot of issues this year that had nothing to do with foreign policy. In fact, on the order of concerns of Jewish voters, like every American voter, foreign policy is not at the top of the list, and it wasn't the case for our community either. So this was a judgment that was based on many issues. Israel was only one of them. The fact that there was some very obvious and very unfortunate friction between the heads of state of Israel and the United States on certain key issues, a friction that was wildly exaggerated, was an unfortunate factor, but I think a couple weeks before the election, that friction was pretty much put to rest, which was wise. It didn't serve Israel's interest, it didn't serve America's interest, it didn't serve the interest of the Jewish community either. So I think we had a result that was very close to what the president got 4 years ago, a little bit lower. He somewhere between 74% and 78% of the vote in 2008, according to the polls, closer to 69 or 70% this time. That's roughly within the range that Democrats can expect. The fact that he did a little bit worse, marginally worse this time, is, I think, in fact, a good thing. because it shows that there's some flexibility in the views of, in the support of the community, which is after all a small community, but has an outsized political impact. Because we vote in higher numbers, because many of us are concentrated in states that are crucial to win if you want to win the presidency because of the way our electoral college is configured. It's not a bad thing that with a lot of noise and a lot of reports of disagreement on policy, cut a little bit of that vote. Maybe that vote is a little bit more up for grabs, and that's a good thing. On the question of, I hope that answers, on the question of Turkey and Israel, surprise you if you hear me say that I think that problem that needs to be solved and that Turkey needs to go a little bit farther than they've gone in the past. I think that they were close to reaching an agreement, an apology on compensation. I think that there were some other conditions that were reported as being in the minds of the Prime Minister of Turkey that were not acceptable, and there was a lack of confidence on the part of many in the Israeli political and military establishment, but particularly the Prime Minister, that would end the conflict with Turkey. The conflict between Turkey and Israel wasn't really quite useful for the Prime Minister of Turkey. And so until we see some changing signal, or there are some other events that occur, or there is some mediating conducted by perhaps the United States, I'm not sure this is going to be solved anytime soon, but it ought to be, because it's in the interest of Turkey, it's in the interest of Israel, it's in the interest of the region, and interest of Europe that this conflict be put to rest. There's still, after all, robust trade between Turkey and Israel. And a couple of days ago, an announcement that a particular military contract is now going to be followed through by Israel that will help Turkey with an American, you understand this, American defense contractor. It's solved. I hope that it will be solved in the next administration. The last question, and the most complicated series of questions for me, has to do with Israeli politics. I can very easily beg off answering this question because I'm based in Washington, not Jerusalem. We should summon my colleague from Jerusalem to appear before this delegation. I can say that I have a great deal of confidence in the Israeli democracy. I can say that the Israeli public supports peace with their Palestinian neighbors. Do not have confidence that the leadership of the Palestinians is ready and willing to make compromise, but wants peace. Doesn't want to have perpetual occupation, doesn't want a one-state solution, wants a two-state solution. You know what a Netanyahu-Lieberman-led coalition will mean for the possibility of negotiations. I have to take the Prime Minister at his word that he supports a two-state solution, that he supports the achievement eventually of a Palestinian state. He will be the dominant player. It will be his voice that represents the state of Israel on these issues. And he has supported a two-state solution, a difficult position for the leader of his party to take. And I think with perhaps greater confidence on the part of the Israeli public in the willingness and the readiness of the Palestinians to sit at the negotiating table, perhaps some help by the Arab states in urging that step instead of the political games that are being played right now. I think also wise transatlantic cooperation in helping create the proper environment. I think that we can, in fact, make some progress, even though the political configuration seems as conducive as you might imagine. The question of democracy in the Gulf countries and other states in the region. Wow. It's easier to ask the question than to answer it. Thank you. That is the best possible answer that I can give. I should probably just cut my losses and stop there. We want democracy. Democracy is the best form of government, without question. We all support democracy. On the other hand, we also see the dangers of taking place in countries that don't have a tradition of democracy, don't have the institutions of democracy, the values of democracy. And perhaps it's wiser to instill those values and start building those institutions before you actually put people into polling places. Because I fear that if we suddenly, very aggressively launch a huge democracy-creating effort in countries where it is foreign, we will have problems. And I think that's the problem, one of the problems that we're experiencing right now. I hope we'll sort through those problems. That again, with European help and American help, we can. But it's a rough ride that we're in for. And we would be in other states where we haven't even started on that path of revolution and for that eventual end.
I think the last question that we need to answer is your question regarding settlements. I know there is grave concern here in Europe, and it is presented in Europe as the main obstacle to achieve peace. I do not want to the issue, but as a matter of fact, the vast majority of settlement activity that is taking place in neighborhoods and settlements that everybody knows will, under any conceivable peace plan, remain part of the State of Israel. So the best way to solve the settlement problem is to come to the negotiating table, achieve peace, and draw the final border. And then you see that most of those settlements where there's activity now will be part of Israel with, agreed swaps, et cetera, et cetera. So we all know the solution. And we fear that making this issue, particularly by the Palestinian, a precondition for even coming to the negotiating table, as President Abbas has done for the past 3 years, has been completely counterproductive. We could have already achieved so much more if he had agreed to come down, particularly during the 10 months of the settlement freeze, where we waited for 9 months to actually even come to the talks and wasted precious time. Again, I think we need to put pressure on both sides to come to the negotiating table, to come to an agreement that we all more or less know the outlines, and this will end also the settlement question.
Thank you. We start the second row, and Mrs. Alexandra Thein.
Yeah, thank you very much for your remarks. Like my colleague, I wondered a little bit that you concentrated so much on Syria, Iran, Hezbollah, and not the real conflict in the Middle East. That is also the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and we know that in the last weeks, many fighting and many Palestinians dead by Israeli bomb attacks and so on. I just come back one go from Dubai. I've been in 3 Emirates, and after the re-election from Obama, I think he got many letters from the Arab world, from many leaders in the Arab world, with only one content, that everybody asks him now to start again with the politic he promised when he was elected the first time. Everybody reminds him again his speech that he made in Cairo, and of this speech. And there are high expectations that now that he can feel free, that re-elected, that he starts again with something in the peace process, that there will be new proposals, or that there will be something, that not only waiting and doing nothing until now. So could you please tell us a little bit, how do you see it? Because there are now high expectations again in the Arab world about this, and if there will be nothing happening, I think there will be a great deception. I just want to make 2 remarks. Already last time, I personally don't believe that the nuclear Iran is the most problem in the Middle East, and I think that we should speak about every atom bomb in the Middle East, also that one of Israel, of a nuclear Israel, and that we all fight for a nuclear-free zone in the Middle East. I think this would be the best solution, and not only to speak one side, but to take everybody in consideration. Remark, it was about that you asked us to put, I mean, there's a big pressure already since many months to put Hezbollah on the list. Us here think that it was a big mistake to put Hamas on the terrorist list, because the consequences, nobody knows what Hamas really think. I'm a member of the Palestinian delegation. It's now our duty always to go there and to speak to them, to know what they really think, and not only to hear what the Israelis are saying and pretend what they are saying, because it's not the truth. And it's ridiculous. We are the legislator and not the executive. Normally the executive is always in advance of the legislature, that afterwards we are going to the Commission, to the President Office of the EU in the East, to tell the executive, to tell the council, to tell the people from the Commission what Hamas has said and what is the state of art, because they don't know it, because they're not allowed to speak with them. So I don't want to have this result with Hezbollah, that nobody knows what they are really saying. And afterwards, we have always to speak with them and to tell it to the council and to the commission, because they don't know what they are saying, because they are no more allowed to speak with them once they are put on the terror list. This will be a big problem, and I think this will not be a solution for anybody. And also that already Obama realized that it was a mistake to put so much his efforts to cut the between Iran and Hezbollah and other states and Hezbollah, because now what happens? Now you have here a real Islamist problem in Syria and so on. He didn't tackle the right problems. He concentrated too much, and I hope he concentrate on the real problems. Thank you.
And Mr. Takkula, we have a little bit, maybe a few minutes overtime because we started a bit late, so I hope understanding from the interpreters.
Yeah. Thank you, Madam Chairman. I understood that be brief, so good for me, but I try to be. Just one question concerning the Obama administration. So, of expectations that peace processes continue and peace negotiations continue. Of course, that's what we hope. But do you believe that, or do Obama's regime or administration believe that two-state solution solve all problems what at the moment we have or they have in the Middle East? When there's two-state solutions, there are independent Palestinian country and Israel, then they are not anymore the problem. Then the democracy, express, women's rights, civil rights, all are clear in the Palestinian side also, and the people in the Gaza and West Bank can live the good and prosperous life. It seems to me that that Hamas and Hezbollah, I don't know who is their representatives, and might be it's a propaganda, as my mate, party mate here already said, but it seems to me that they don't like to build the society there, and that I think that's the problem. That because in the European Union, it's the union of values, and I think only role what we have in the Middle East, we have to promote democracy, human rights, freedom, express. And it seems to me that this two-state solution is against our values at the moment, because there are no any intention to build the democratic country, but there's intention to build a new country based on the Islam rule and Sharia.
Thank you, and I would like to also ask a short comment of the recent happenings in the area. There have been a heavy attack from Gaza to Israel launched, and also, cause or not, at the same time there have been some rockets from the side, or if they were on purpose or not. Do you see that there is a danger that there are forces in the area who would like to also escalate the situation in such position that Israel interim? And do you have any conversation in US about this situation?
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. With limited time, I know, so I'll try to be very brief, and I think that my colleague will want to jump in as well. I don't think I can cover the entire territory here. I thank you very much for your question about Hamas and Hezbollah and whether engaging them or not engaging them serves the interests of, well, particularly members of the European Parliament who are interested in pursuing the cause of peace. Out of a sense that perhaps we don't really know what they stand for, or we're not hearing what they're saying. And I respectfully disagree that we are not hearing what they're saying, because we can hear what they're saying. We can see what they're broadcasting on their television programs. And it's vile, and it's scary, and it's anti-democratic, and it's anti-Western. And I don't think that engaging them is going to make them change their stripes. I think it will fool us into thinking that perhaps they are reasonable. They are not reasonable. They're pursuing a very clear agenda, and I think it's the agenda that has been very clearly sent by your colleague sitting next to you. That's my fear, and I don't think that talking them is going to make them any better or more civilized. But we do need to pursue peace. We do need to find ways to ease tensions. We do need to improve the lives of the Palestinian people. We do need to present them and enforce for them a path to political rights. And the challenge, how do we do that in the context of fractured Palestinian leadership, Palestinian leadership, very anti-democratic forces among the Palestinians, a tradition of who do not represent the Palestinian people and their aspirations for peace. Leaders who are not now brave enough or wise enough to figure out a way to make compromises when they have spent decades selling their people that there will be no compromises. These are problems, but the victims are the Palestinian people. who have been badly served. And I'm hoping that we can find a way to build some confidence and to also find ways to create bridges between middle levels of Palestinian and Israeli society, which at one point did exist and now hardly ever exist, between government officials from the Palestinian Authority and the Israeli government, between businesses. Some of this is happening. Far more has to happen. Europe can play a role in helping more of it happen. Political foundations help. The European Union has helped. I hope that more will happen. The question about, asked by your colleague about whether the two-state solution is really a goal that is worthy of, at this point, given what's going on in Palestinian society, it is, but with eyes wide open and with caution. It will serve the long-term interests of the Palestinian people who do deserve rights and have been badly served by their leaders and by neighbors, by the way, in the Arab states, who has them as political pawns. But it will also serve the interests of Israel and the interests of the West to have that resolved. It is not the central conflict. It is not the central problem. It is not the core problem in the Middle East today. I submit that it is one that needs to be addressed, but it is not the core conflict. We've seen 36,000 people killed in Syria. Where does that stand in relation to conflicts in the Middle East? Obviously, pretty significant and pretty destabilizing and pretty threatening to many states. Lastly, on your question, Madam Chairwoman, about the provocations that have taken place in recent days, and there are activists in Gaza, whether there are the Syrian regime that feel that creating another Middle East war will somehow advance their cause, and I think the answer is yes. That is a distraction that would be welcomed, I think, by the Assad regime. And disturbing the possibility of Israeli-Palestinian peace is clearly in the interests of Palestinian extremists who don't want peace and will not accept compromise. We have to be steady and we have to be resolute. And frankly, we have to understand that Israel will have to act to defend its citizens, and we must stand by our democratic ally when it does so. Thank you.